Making trades is a common and necessary tactic for front office staffs to help deliver wins to their teams. Finding gaps within your roster that another team can help you fill. Of course, that's the idea. Naturally, teams will win trades and teams will lose trades. But I don't think that we've seen a team suffer a more severe loss within a trade than the one we'll talk about today. This is the story of how one trade spearheaded the destruction of a once beloved baseball city, causing relocation and dooming the franchise for nearly a decade to come. But first, a quick word from Underdog Fantasy. It's almost winter. We're spending some more time indoors, and unfortunately, NFL has given us some of the most boring primetime matchups imaginable. But you can make them a bit more interesting with Underdog Fantasy. My favorite thing is to just put a buck or two on a pick'em slip and add a little intrigue to an otherwise lackluster viewing experience. And right now, if you use my promo code GOMES, you guys are going to get $100 free. Underdog will match all first deposits up to $100. So get in on the action, use my promo code GOMES, and thank you to them for sponsoring the channel. The Montreal Expos were awarded an expansion franchise in the year 1969. And to say they got off to a slow start would be an understatement. It took them 11 years for them to achieve their first winning season. 2 years later, in 1981, the Expos would make the postseason. In fact, the Expos would come up just a couple games shy of making the World Series. They lost in the National League Championship Series against the Dodgers, 3-2. And that probably should serve as enough background to who the Montreal Expos were, because that was their lone playoff appearance in 34 seasons. We do need to highlight 1994, another season interrupted as the MLB Players Union went on strike. And this year, they wouldn't come back. The season was terminated after 114 games. And as irony would have it, the Montreal Expos were the best team in baseball. They had a record of 74-40. Playoffs seemed like a certainty, and who knows what could happen from there. In that season and the corresponding strike would serve as a beginning to the end of the Montreal Expos as we knew them. A major concern in the constructing of a new collective bargaining agreement for baseball to operate under was revenue sharing. The basic principle of revenue sharing is to help secure funding for smaller market teams. It takes revenue from every franchise, pools it together, and distributes it evenly across every MLB team. Revenue sharing is very important for teams that struggle to pull in money, especially when you're stuck with the financial constraints the Expos ownership put themselves into. Canadian businessman Claude Brochu and a group of local investors, they had bought the Expos in 1990 for 100 million Canadian dollars. Brochu was the largest shareholder, and he became the managing general partner of the team. A major reason why the group had bought the Expos was to keep them in Montreal. There were other candidates that wanted to purchase the team and move them to Arizona or Miami. So the minority partners saw this as almost charitable donations. They had done their part and they weren't willing to put up any more money, leaving Brochu and the Expos to struggle to pay for a competitive team on the field. Brochu made it clear to the front office staff that they had to cut salary, and that they did. By the 1995 season, they had traded players such as Marquise Grissom, Ken Hill, John Wetland. They let Larry Walker leave in free agency, and players such as Moises Alou and Pedro Martinez would also leave the Expos within the next couple of years. Fan attendance, which was already struggling at the time, hit new lows. In fact, for the Expos' last 7 seasons within Major League Baseball, they were last, ranking 30th in fan attendance each year. Interest in the team plummeted, and that was a big reason why Brochu decided to sell the team. Jeffrey Loria would take control of the team by the end of 1999, and he wanted to change the culture in Montreal, specifically by putting money into the team, getting good talent and hopefully translating that into wins. And Loria did partially succeed in that goal. In 1999, the Expos only spent $16 million on the roster, and the first year under Loria, they were up to $34.8 million. However, it didn't change much in the win column. The Expos won 67 games in 2000 and just 68 wins in 2001. Around this time, Loria's looking for funding for a new ballpark. However, the city didn't find the plans to be realistic and ultimately vetoed the proposition. There was once again issues between MLBPA and the owners in finding common ground for another collective bargaining agreement, and one idea the owners had to create leverage was to eliminate two teams from Major League Baseball. The two teams they had in mind were the Minnesota Twins and the Montreal Expos, and this was a pretty big threat because every owner had voted in favor of this except for Minnesota and Montreal. Thankfully for the Minnesota Twins, they had a lease agreement in effect to play at the Metrodome, saving them from elimination. And by association, the Expos were probably safe for the time being as well, as MLB didn't want to take from the National League, but not the American League as well. So even though the threat for the time being is off, the writing is still on the wall. The franchise in Montreal, their clock is ticking. And around these elimination talks, that was enough for Jeffrey Loria to sell the team. He had had enough after just 2 years as owner of the Expos. And the sale was set forth to Major League Baseball. They had purchased the team as a collective, so all 29 of the other owners in Major League Baseball would help run the Expos. And it was here that the consortium of owners had appointed Omar Minaya as the general manager for the Montreal Expos heading into the 2002 MLB season. Despite not many improvements made to a team that failed to win 70 games or more the last 4 seasons, the Expos were relatively in the playoff hunt by mid-June. Omar Minaya, in his first role as a general manager, saw an opportunity. He made a trade with the Cleveland Indians that would bring in Bartolo Colon to Montreal in exchange for a couple of prospects, that being Cliff Lee, Brandon Phillips, and Grady Sizemore. And so often, looking back at trades, you can chalk things up as hindsight is 20/20. It's easy to judge a trade once you know how everybody's career plays out. But even at the time of this trade, it made 0 sense. On the day the trade went through, the Expos had a 41-36 record. Like we said, all signs point to a team that's overperforming. How likely is it that they can sustain this progress through a 162-game season? Trading 3 of the team's top prospects for a starting pitcher who's going to hit unrestricted free agency in a year and a half's time. And we know the Expos aren't going to be able to pay him. Bartolo was having a nice season. He pitched to a 2.55 ERA and over 100 innings pitched for the Indians that season at the time of the trade. But mortgaging your future for a starting pitcher who's going to play 1 out of every 5 games for the next year and a half is nothing short of insanity. On one hand, if this does work out, if the team continues to overperform, the Expos make the playoffs, there was at least a sliver of a hope that that could keep the team in Montreal. And with that, much will be accredited to Omar Minaya's trade. He'll be hailed as a hero. And on the flip side, if it doesn't work out, well, the Expos are probably done, at least in Montreal. Potentially, they could still get eliminated. That threat was lessened, but it was still there. So in that case, it's a last-ditch effort to get something. A one last blaze of glory run to try and get the Expos to the postseason. Either way, Minaya's reputation really won't be tarnished. Naturally, as we all know by now, the Expos did not make the playoffs that year. They did finish with a respectable 83-79 record, but ultimately fell a bit short. And as for Bartolo Colon, the team traded him later on that winter. The Expos lost their future for a 3-month rental. And what could that future have looked like? Cliff Lee won a Cy Young Award with the Cleveland Indians in 2008. A 13-year career which featured 4 All-Star appearances and 5 seasons receiving Cy Young consideration. Cliff Lee became one of the best pitchers of his era. He was fantastic. Grady Sizemore, another key component of those Cleveland Indian teams in the mid-2000s, he had put up a very nice resume himself up until injuries shortened his career. A 4-year stretch from 2005 to 2008, Grady played in basically every game, hitting 107 home runs, stealing 115 bases, achieving a very good 128 OPS plus, all the while playing elite defense, taking home a couple of Gold Gloves at center field. And Brandon Phillips, while he didn't have much success as a Cleveland Indian, he got traded to the Cincinnati Reds, where he made a handful of All-Star teams. A 4-time Gold Glove Award winner who became one of the best second basemen of the National League throughout his time. All of that lost in one season on one trade that'll go down as one of the worst in history. The story from here is pretty well written. The Expos only lasted another 2 seasons after that before they'd moved to Washington in 2005. And much with their depleted farm system, they weren't very good for quite some time. They didn't reach the playoffs again until 2012, a 31-year playoff drought from the Expos' first appearance in 1981. So looking back at this trade, it is a difficult subject. There was a real threat that the franchise would cease to exist. With the future of the Montreal Expos on the line, Omar Minaya stepped in and did what he thought was right. And ultimately, I don't think anybody was right. MLB wanted the Expos gone. That was very clear. They tried to eliminate them, and when that couldn't happen, they wanted to relocate them, putting that kind of pressure on a team, especially one with a first-time general manager, that you're pretty much damned if you do, damned if you don't. The Expos were in limbo, essentially just waiting to hear where they're going to play next. So I think it's safe to say that Minaya was definitely influenced by MLB to make this kind of deal, severing any future for the Montreal Expos and all but guaranteeing that they're going to leave the city. I had lots of fun going back, doing the research on this, and I want you guys to let me know in the comment section below what trades could rival this as some of the worst in baseball history. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you're new, and there's many more to come. Thank you all for watching.